This is, for me, extremely interesting. Huh? I really like presenting this. It's the reporting structure. Let's call it the ideal reporting structure. So we're going to set a few players here. Huh? We're first going to set the players of the shareholders. Now, in an organization, it might not be the shareholders, it might be the stakeholders. Now, I'm just trying to save a bit of place here. I'm calling them the shareholders. If you're working for a governmental institution, a transnational institution, then this is going to be more your stakeholders than necessarily your shareholders. But they hold the same role. These are the ones that finally are, finally the most interested by the results of the organization as a whole. Underneath it, you have the board. Now, these are improper boards, and here I'm not talking about improper boards, but if boards are properly governed, then you're going to have representatives from the shareholders, as well as often sort of independent board members. So they're called, independent or non-executive board members, often from, and this is, really best practice, when they're outside the organization. Say Elon Musk has his own companies, and there he might be on, there I'm sure he's on the board of those, but he's also on the board of organizations where, he's not a shareholder, he might not have any stake in, but he is acting independently from those organizations to give advice, to make sure that everything is running properly. So we're going to place below that the audit committee. Now, I like to say that the audit committee is a subcommittee of the board. So it is technically part of the board. However, depending on a document called the Terms of Reference of the audit committee, they're going to have more or less power. That's to say that they will maybe be allowed to take decisions fully independently, without board consultation. They might be allowed only to, pre-approve before it goes to board approval. And in fact, ask yourself, is the audit committee mandatory? No. No, the audit committee actually isn't mandatory because it's a committee of the board. There are organizations, not necessarily following best practices, but maybe they're smaller organizations that don't wish to split their board and just have all different members of the board decide on audit and risk decisions. Now, this flies in certain countries, not in others. In many countries, your audit committee needs to, especially for certain sectors like the financial sector, needs to have fully independent non-executive members. In any case, I'd say this is best practice. Your audit committee is best governed when it has at least 50% independent members, or it's much better when your audit committee is fully independent members, and it's much better when your chairman of the audit committee is an independent member. Now, these members are, I believe in pretty much all cases I've seen, also members of the board themselves. We have management. This is, these are the so-called executives because they execute what? Well, in theory, they execute what the board wants them to put in place. And here, finally, we have internal audit, and above it, the chief audit executive. And so internal audits, just internal audit without the chief executive directly reports to the chief audit executive. And so in their reporting line, for example, evaluations, their evaluations are simply done by the chief audit executive, which puts a lot of burden on the chief audit executive to be, to ensure that organizational independence, even though I'll tell you, that's not always in their ability to do so. So let's start putting different reporting lines. Now, I just want you to think for a second. who does the chief audit executive and internal audit report to? Who do they report to? Do they report to the audit committee, or do they report to management? Or do they report to the board or the shareholders? Giving you a second there, but it's kind of a trick question, because they have multiple different reporting lines, and in some ways you could say that they report to all of them, but they report to all of them in different ways. In fact, as head of internal audit, I've reported often directly to shareholders. I worked for a company, half owned by private equity, but half owned by 3 historical shareholders. Well, one of those, I'd have meetings every 2 weeks with the shareholder just to keep him informed. So that was kind of a reporting at that level. Organizational independence exists if the chief audit executive reports, and here's the important word, functionally to the board/audit committee. Remember, audit committee is part of the board, so reports functionally to the board and administratively to the CEO or similar. Let me just get into the similar part. So the standards allow that you're not necessarily reporting as chief audit executive to the CEO. However, it is best practice. Why? Because you're supposed to report to a level of the organization which allows you to best carry out your duties. You could report to, say the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer, the Chief, I've seen more arguable circumstances of reporting, say, to the Chief, Compliance Officer or Chief Risk Management Officer. There, I would say that probably is not at a level that allows you to carry out your duties properly and could have some conflicts of interest. It is usually at a level that allows you to carry out your different responsibilities. And why is the CEO seen as best practice? Well, simply because if the CEO says, yes, I support internal audit. Now, usually they don't say that, but they show it through their actions. My examples is just being introduced by the CEO to different people in the organization. Well, I can tell you, when you're introduced by the CEO, anyone in the organization will listen to you. If the CEO is in copy of any single email you will send, you are definitely going to get a response, and probably within 20 minutes and very detailed. So it gives you the power to do this. But what are the inconveniences of reporting to the CEO? Just think about that for a second. CEOs are busy. CEOs are busy. And that is why it can be a bit less convenient to report to a CEO. It could also be that the CEO is new in the organization or different reasons. But you could report to the CFO if, for example, they've been in the organization a long time, if they're extremely well respected, if you're going to be able to get things done through the CFO. Okay? But we're going to discover a bit more about the functional and administrative reporting line.